Welcome to the Arizona State Capitol and Plaza. More of those samples, they're everywhere. Hi, and welcome to Yeti at Large. This is a channel focused on making the most out of what you have, no matter where you're at. Thanks for tuning in and helping out. This will be a semi-unconventional tour of the Capitol grounds with some observations about the Court of Appeals and some of the exhibits. I'll tell you right now, I'm a proud patriot. I love my country, I love my state, and I have a fair amount of trust in the predictability of the Arizona court system. That being said, my first observation was of the Arizona Beverage Council set up over here, passing out free samples to all of the Capitol employees or anybody who walked by. They offered me some, but I didn't take it because I was coached as a peace officer that even accepting a cup of coffee could constitute a gift to a civil servant, which is a gratuity, which could be considered a bribe. I would strongly encourage the people who work at the Capitol grounds not to accept these freebies because that constitutes lobbying and undue influence. Everybody knows the story of the Code Talkers. I think it's fascinating. One of my favorite parts of that, though, is it was kept a secret until well into Vietnam. I lived next to the Dene people for a large portion of my life. I tried to learn even the simplest phrases in their beautiful language, never could master it. I worked with a lot of good peace officers that come from Dene clans. Nothing but love. One thing about the Code Talkers, a big portion of this plaza is dedicated to soldiers and wars, which in a lot of people's minds would equate violence. These guys came in peace and they saved more lives than they took. And I think that's beyond special. Sam Bilson, you did fine work, my good man. I have never done this in almost 200 videos. Walking with a selfie stick. God help me. How about perspective? How about size? Here. This is a $1 bill. This is the size of the breech of the main guns off the USS Arizona. So we're talking about juice. Do you personally have the kind of juice to create a casting like this and a milling? These weapons of war. Look at the breech lock. Imagine the kind of pressures that this thing develops to lob a projectile that weighs as much as a Volkswagen Beetle dozens of miles inland and drop it in your pocket at a full sprint. The weapons of war. Now, I've lost family to the Navy. I have family in the Navy. I love our armed forces. I believe in a strong military and a strong defense. I believe in peace through superior firepower. At the time this gun was cast, this was that superior firepower. But I also have a tremendous amount of respect for what General Eisenhower warned us about the industrial military complex and the rise of undue power and authority as a result of that. And we've seen a tremendous amount of that lately. I believe in the weapons of peace. I do not believe in the weapons of war. It's interesting that we have a VFW, Veterans of Foreign War, but in no place can I find a Veterans of Domestic War affiliation. That's my take on it. You got that kind of juice? I was going to talk to you about those three parts of the law course, but it's too loud with the jets. Let's try to find some place in the shade that's a little more quiet. Remember I told you about my buddy Sylvester Herrera? I'll put a link to that full episode. Here he is on the Medal of Honor wall, right in at the front of the Capitol, where these guys should be. Frank Luke Jr., Isaiah Mays, Cornelius Smith, Chiquito. Pretty cool stuff here. It's where these guys should be remembered for their sacrifices. Come on, let's go find another place to talk about law school. This is about as quiet as you're going to get down at the Capitol Plaza. This is the back side of the Capitol building. If I was working down here, this would be one of my favorite places. It's kind of private, kind of secluded. All the jets are on the other side. So I want you to get out a pen and a pad of paper, and I'm going to give you law school in 3 easy lessons. This was referred to me by one of the greatest litigators I have ever known. Seen her in action. She was phenomenal, unstoppable. And at the end of the day, there's no substitute for being able to think on your feet. As long as you're grounded in the truth, you're good. So, law school in 3 easy steps. I'm about to save you $250,000. Step number 1, if the facts are on your side, argue the facts, the truth. Spell it out, hold nothing back, play no parlor tricks, no games. If the facts are on your side, argue the facts. On this date, at this time, this individual seated to my left in a Hawaiian shirt as identified by the court clerk did X, Y, and Z. And that leads us to step number 2. If the law is on your side, argue the law. Your Honor, I could refer you to Arizona Revised Statute Title 28-701.02.A3. On this date, at this time, at this location, which is an area within this court's jurisdiction, this individual, as identified by his Arizona driver's license, did indeed commit the following traffic violation, as identified by my dash-mounted radar, which was certified on these dates. If the facts are on your side, argue the facts. If the law is on your side, argue the law. If you don't have either one of those, flip the table over. Go nuts. Pound on the table. Talk about Colombian neckties and conspiracy theories and third-party, unaffiliated nonsense. You just might win in a jury trial. You won't win against the bench, though, in a non-jury trial, which many civil actions and election law cases are not necessarily jury-driven. But if you don't have the facts and you don't have the law, flip the table over. That's what they did in so many cases that give lawyers a bad name. Because what have you got to lose? And those are all billable hours. And at the end of the day, an overwhelming majority of defense attorneys are only interested in those billable hours. That's law school in 3 easy steps. This is about the craziest tree I have ever seen. I didn't know better. I would say this is something that should come from Madagascar. And that's the back corner of the executive building. One thing I can tell you I always check when I go to a business is to see the quality of the cars the employees are driving. These are all reserved lots for state employees, and I gotta tell you, most of these cars are pretty darn new and in really nice shape. These are civil servants. Think about it. Progress. Can't have that building. It was old. We need a new building. So this is the Arizona Supreme Court building complex on Jefferson Street. The appellate court, Division 1, is in here. And this is where this campaign, this gubernatorial race case is going to be heard. This is where the procedure goes. We've talked about how an appeal process doesn't retry the case. It doesn't allow for the admission of new evidence. It merely looks for omissions in the application of appropriate law or the misapplication of law. And appeals courts is a tough place to be because you've got to get a judge to disagree with the previous judge. And that's going to be difficult. Inherently, you only have two of the three concepts I teased you about earlier. The facts have got to be on your side, and you have to have the law, the Arizona Revised Statutes. In Arizona, it's predominantly Title 16. At this point, the sirens, the airplanes, and the one homeless guy screaming at traffic ruin the quality of the audio. Here's where we talk about those three culpable mental states that the court will consider. The lowest of those three is reckless, there's knowingly, and then there's intentionally. In this recent gubernatorial appeal and the original case, the court required that the culpable mental state was intentionally, a very difficult standard to achieve outside of what amounts to a confession from the defendant stating they intended to do X, Y, and Z. They intended to do harm. Now, if you can establish knowingly, if somebody knowingly violated policies, procedures, rules, or common and accepted practice, then you may be able to argue that they did it intentionally. The easiest of those standards to achieve is reckless. If somebody was reckless in the commission of their duty, in the exercise of a responsibility, you could argue that they recklessly caused me harm. In this case, in an election law, it's questioning the validity of the election. These kinds of cases are not unique. They're not uncommon. The front of this building reminds me of Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. I've dated myself. This is actually the House of Representatives. They're in session but off the floor right now, so we can talk without violating the rules of decorum. Checked with security and made sure they were okay with me filming in the public areas as long as I didn't violate those published rules of decorum. Interesting that I'm in the legislative branch when I'm more interested in talking about judicial rules of appeal, dealing with the gubernatorial election and the outcomes and the processes. Let's go next door over to the Senate, see if we can get a shot of the Senate floor, and then go on to the Capitol. So we're across the plaza over here in the Senate. Just a minute ago we were in the House of Representatives. Very different feel. No Arizona mural, no turquoise carpet, night sky with stars on it. They're in session but not on the floor, so again we got real lucky that we could film from the gallery. So speaking of the legislative, transitioning into the judicial, we're talking about the Court of Appeals and the appeal process. Traditionally speaking, the simplest explanation is that there's no new evidence introduced in an appeal. You're not retrying the case per se. What you're explaining to the judge or the bench, what you're hoping to see happen is an examination of the process and the decisions that were made, and was the law incorrectly applied in this case, or was the law not applied as it should have been? Typically those are supported by precedent, but you can never go wrong by going straight back to the Arizona Revised Statutes. That's where your argument is always going to be founded on. And when you use the simple, plain, easily to digest language, you can make your case by showing that the previous court failed to apply the law as required by ARS and by precedent, or incorrectly applied the law. Interesting, because those laws are made here and across the plaza. So when I was very young, the year I graduated high school, I watched Officer Murph of the Tempe PD perform as well as I ever prayed to as a peace officer. And since this is a dog memorial, let's look at it from a dog's perspective. Just kidding. Canines are some of the single greatest assets that any peace officer organization has. Because if a canine was coming to the memorial, this is the end they would start on. I have a geology question for you. If this is stone, and stone takes millions of years to form, how did this tree lay around long enough to become petrified and not rot away? There's one of these in the Grand Canyon. that's standing vertically. It never fell. And it's standing vertically through what geologists describe as millions of years of geologic strata. I believe all the way down as low as the Vishnu schists. How does that happen? I got a tree in my front yard. It's been on the ground for about 3 years. It's 3/4 rotten. I can't quite figure it out myself. So, bizarre little artifact and incredibly interesting. This is a rock that came from the Marianas Trench when the submersible, the Trieste, piloted by Captain Picard, not of Star Trek, went to the very bottom, Challenger Deep, and retrieved this chunk of rock. The fascinating thing is this is the exact same rock that you find in Jerome, Arizona, which is a mile high. 35,000 feet deep, mile high. Things really turn and move in plate tectonics. That's cool. So I'm on the backside of the executive tower, the West Wing, and I have my pocket knife, which means I wouldn't be necessarily welcome through security to cut through the building. So it looks like I got to go all the way around. So let's just see. You ever seen such gorgeous lawns? In Phoenix, Arizona. Heavens to Murgatroyd. The Supreme Court complex, and right next door is the Attorney General's office. That's the top cop in the state. Four Freedoms vodka. What freedom does vodka give you? Empty plastic bottle of Four Freedoms vodka laying in the gravel at the building. No parking. No entry. No photography. No weapons. No access. No exit. Stop counting how many no buttons, no signs, and no plaques I've seen today. Now look, I've designed security for retail. I've been in public safety. Believe me, I understand. But it is so easy when you're part of a status quo to lose complete sight of who you serve and what your job is. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to be in the public sector. Not just carry a badge and put on body armor and carry a gun. I don't care who you are. Every echelon of the system takes courage. You should get some hustle on. You should be trying to compete with the private sector. You should be making sure you're serving the people. And you should certainly be able to articulate what your four freedoms are. Just sad. The system can work. It can support you. It can. It can. It does, and it will. But to be involved in the system is probably the single most terrifying thing you'll ever experience, because you don't fight City Hall. The odds are against you, and you have one refuge: the truth and the law. And if those two converge, you cannot be defeated. You cannot lose. You cannot wind up being wronged. Four freedoms. I can't think of what those are. This is the State Capitol Executive Tower. I think what we could affectionately call the West Wing. It's a pretty imposing high-rise with the private road out front. I couldn't help but be struck by the Ukrainian flag flying at the exact same level as the United States flag, with the proper display of the Arizona flag below the national flag on the same pole. Now, I don't have anything against the Ukrainian people, and I wish them well. I am hesitant to make petty expressions of affiliation based on trends and current events, demonstrating an affiliation with an unknown cause with an uncertain outcome. Stick to just the national flag and the state flag, with the very rare exception of almost universally agreed upon other symbols, such as the POW flag maybe. It's time to focus less on some of these luxury emotions that we tend this day and age to indulge ourselves in, and get back to basic core principles. The whole point of state governance is to keep people safe, keep the water moving, keep the roads put together, real basic things as outlined by a state constitution. That should be done with an effort to strive towards private sector efficiencies and at the bare minimum amount of expense to John Q. taxpayer. Now that's questionably defined. I've been walking around the Capitol today, and boy, there are buildings in every single corner of the Capitol Plaza and dedicated to a lot of worthy endeavors. But boy, are they lavish, boy, are they plush. They're well appointed. I think it's time to shrink the size of government, make it a little more lean and a little more efficient for all of us. I've asked permission to film everywhere here. Couldn't ask for a more beautiful day. I'd do this in July, but boy, I'd sure pay.
Now, literally less than a stone's throw away from those lavish ivory towers and manicured lawns with free samples of energy drinks is a sprawling tent city that grows every day. Being in public safety, I've dealt directly with this population and these encampments, and I did it with all the compassion I could muster. You cannot comprehend the despair and the desperation of people who live like this. It's utterly heart-wrenching. Now, whether it's a result of chemical addiction and you're out there on purpose because you want to be, or else you are so injured and incapable of successfully navigating that contract with a modern society, to allow this to happen, to allow this to fester without attempting to apply some level of remedy is unthinkable for a modern, compassionate society. It went on for miles, it seemed like.
The final word I'll leave you with was a comment from one of my viewers who said there's always gold in one pan. What he was referring to is a comment I made where I was hoping that justice was blind and that veil wasn't tilting to one side or the other. I don't care who wins per se outside of the truth and the accuracy of the claim. I want the truth to win. I believe the candidate that I supported is on that side of truth, but if we lose grounded in the law, lose grounded in the facts. But when he said there's always gold in one pan, what he was talking about was you can be blindfolded and still tell where that gold is. He wasn't talking about being bribed and people taking money. But he was talking about the tendency of people to prefer either their affiliations, the status quo, or maybe they have unpublished agendas to other causes outside of the truth. I don't know any of that. You never will. But there's always gold in one pan. I'm hoping the pan that comes up with the gold here is the naked and exposed truth. It all comes out in the end. It always does.